Elves were the earliest of Eru Iluvatar's children and are one of the most advanced and mysterious beings in Middle-earth. But what exactly are these immortal creatures? Elves were the first beings created by Eru Iluvatar himself, as only he had the ability to create life of this capacity. They were also the first to be awoken from the Great Sleep, when the world had been finished by Eru and the Valar. They awoke by the shore on the eastern coast of Middle-earth. Originally there were 6, however they quickly found more of their kin, and eventually managed to have around 144 of their people. Now, upon awakening, the first thing that the elves saw was the stars, and the first thing that they heard was the water. For this reason, both of these two aspects would go on to be very important in many parts of the elven life and culture. After the elves awoke and began exploring Middle-earth and developing their culture, Melkor, who would eventually become Morgoth, would begin to kidnap them in an attempt to turn them into the early orcs, as he didn't have the ability to create life himself, so he chose to corrupt the children of Iluvatar. However, one of the Valar, known as Ormir, came across the elves on his travels, and chose to live alongside them and defend them against Morgoth's forces. Over time, Morgoth's span of power grew, and he became a threat, dominating much of Middle-earth and continued to kidnap the elves. He was eventually defeated by the Valar, who chose to move many of the elves to a land of Valinor, to the west across the Sea of Middle-earth. This was the land of the Undying, where only those with the gift of immortality could reside. However, there was a good amount of elves that chose not to leave Middle-earth. Some simply felt too attached to the lands, and others would remain looking for their lost comrades who had been taken by Morgoth. This division is known as the Sundering of the Elves. Eventually, Morgoth was released from his imprisonment and was given free roam of Valinor. Now, Morgoth really hated the elves for what had been done to him, because he maybe believed that the elves weren't worth his imprisonment, that maybe the other Valar were too attached to them. For this reason, he began poisoning the minds of the elves, particularly warning them of Iluvatar's other children, Man. Many of the Valinor elves feared that they would inherit Middle-earth instead of them. However, on Middle-earth, many of the elves who had stayed would actually begin to communicate with the First Men and teach them crafts to ensure that they could survive. They actually enjoyed quite an easy alliance. Eventually, Morgoth returned to Middle-earth and began warring with the Elves and Valar again, but luckily he was defeated finally and sent to the Endless Abyss. From here, the Elves lived for over a millennia in relative peace. They founded their own cities such as Erisien. However, Sauron, the new reigning Dark Lord, played a trick to finish his master's work. Posing as a messenger from the Valar, he taught the Elves, particularly Celebrimbor, the art of ring-making, and this leads to the story of the 19 Rings of Power. The Elves were not easily deceived and hid many of their rings. They would go on to form the last alliance with men of Middle-earth, and following Sauron's sacking of Erisien, Elrond would lead the survivors to found the city of Rivendell. The Elves are in many ways the most formidable and wisest of the races on Middle-earth. They had enhanced vision, hearing, and their light frame made them incredibly nimble. Their immortality ensured that they don't age, however they can be killed by conventional means, and are able to die from grief. However, elves actually go through reincarnation and reappear on Valinor. The elves learned much of what they know directly from the Valar themselves, making them experts in almost every craft. Their immortality and close ties to the gods make them the wisest of the other races. Whereas men and dwarves often rush into problems, the elves know the value of patience and perspective. By the time of Sauron's return and the end of the War of the Ring, the elves were finally ready to sail across to Valinor. The magic of Middle-earth that Iluvatar had used to create it was a mere echo of its former self, and the elves knew that when it went, they must go with it. Over time, nearly all elves on Middle-earth had left, believing that they'd put it in the capable hands of men, and it would be safe. But what do you think of the elves? Now, it's important to note in this video we've really only just scratched the surface of the elves, and there's countless more stories to tell of their deeds all across Middle-earth, as they're possibly the most influential race, but we're gonna save that for another time. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if you'd like to see more Lord of the Rings lore in the future. I hope that you enjoyed. If so, please remember to like, share and sub, as it's always really appreciated and helps the channel grow. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at @TheLoreGuy for regular updates. Thanks again for watching, I do hope that you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.